U.S. government was handling certain foreign policy decisions. So, for example, some people who were a part of the military, and my dad was former military as well, they started to question these decisions during the Iraq War. So I'm curious if there was one event in particular that sort of changed the course for you.
Well, I mean, it's definitely Iraq. I mean, I grew up, my father was also a career Air Force, and I was old enough to remember when the Vietnam War ended, and he was a Vietnam War veteran, and so was my uncle, and so were many of my relatives, and the betrayal they felt about that conflict. So as a child, it was not a strange thought that the government could lie to you and deceive you and mislead you. But I also saw how my father reacted to that. He was a servant of his nation. And his job was to get up in the morning and put on the uniform and go to work defending our country. And so I realized that, just because the government does stupid things doesn't mean that, this isn't a country worth serving, that still something good here to defend. And if you have a problem with your government, that's the job of a citizen to vote in a new government, et cetera. It sort of was a civics lesson for me. And so I've always been skeptical. I mean, even going into Desert Storm, I remember being called into a general's office. I was on an intelligence team supporting some work, and he asked me what I thought about this. So this was in October of 1990. And I said, "Sir, we're fighting the wrong Arabs." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "The Iraqis ain't the bad guys here. The Kuwaitis are the bad guys. The Saudis are the bad guys. We're fighting the wrong Arabs." But I went to war anyways against the Iraqis because that was the orders I was given. They weren't unconstitutional orders. I can have a disagreement with policy. Doesn't make the orders unlawful that I have to execute. But Iraq is different. See, I was a weapons inspector in Iraq, and I was called upon to disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction, together with hundreds of other brave men and women who, put it all on the line in this cause. Iraq didn't always tell the truth. When we first started, they were holding on to chemical weapons, biological weapons, ballistic missiles. They had an undeclared nuclear weapons program. So anybody who says, well, Iraq never had any WMD, you're wrong. They had a whole bunch of WMD. That's why people like me existed. We went into Iraq and we found it. We discovered it. We accounted for it. We did our job of destroying, disarming, dismantling Iraq's weapons of mass destruction program, so that by 1995, 1996, we were comfortable in saying that we had accounted for 95 to 97% of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. But the standard was 100%. And so we continued to be sent into the breach to try and find that last remaining percentage. But at this point, we were also monitoring the totality of Iraq's industrial infrastructure with full-time, 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week cameras, no-notice inspections. The Iraqis had to submit all their paperwork through us for export-import monitoring. And we could say that they weren't building any new weapons of mass destruction. And the weapons of mass destruction they had either been destroyed by us or expired. And so my problem came when the U.S. government said that, well, first of all, I resigned in 1998 because the U.S. government was using the inspection process for something other than disarmament. They were trying to get rid of Saddam Hussein. And I'm not saying getting rid of Saddam Hussein is a bad thing. I'm saying it wasn't my job. My job as a weapons inspector was to be assiduous in the implementation of Security Council resolutions calling for the disarmament of Iraq. And my teams went into Iraq with that understanding. And if you're going to be anything in this world, you have to have integrity. And so if you're going to say, I accept this mission, this is my mission, then you have to adhere to that mission. And you can't allow anybody, including your own country, to use your mission for purposes that weren't mandated. And the U.S. government was trying to use my inspection teams to spy on Saddam, to gather intelligence, to try and kill him, throw him out of power. That was incompatible. I resigned. I called him out on that. As the Bush administration started to make their case for war against Iraq in 2002, it'd be one thing if they said Saddam's an evil guy, we got to take him out. I'd say, well, that's your opinion. I disagree with you, but it's a policy disagreement. But what they said was, we know that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. And I said, no, you don't, because I ran the intelligence program. I was the #1 dude in the world about all this stuff. And I know what you know, and you know that you don't know that. You're lying through your teeth. Literally lying through your teeth. And I knocked on the door of every congressman I could. I screamed as loud as I could. I did everything humanly possible to educate people about the fact that the U.S. government was lying their way to a war. And that's when I realized that this isn't about a policy difference. We're allowed to have policy differences. People can disagree. This is about the U.S. government lying to the American people about a case for war that was going to end up having Americans cross the line of departure. That means that we're going to close with and destroy the enemy through firepower and maneuver based on a lie. Marines, I'm a former Marine, we're going to be thrown into the breach. We're going to be called upon to sacrifice their lives for a lie. That's unacceptable. And that's when I said, this system's broke, fundamentally broke, because they're deliberately lying to the American people. You know, I think the American people are adults. They can be told the truth. And again, policy differences are policy differences. We can disagree. You and I probably disagree on a whole bunch of stuff. I'm just guessing. We probably agree on a whole bunch of stuff too. This is okay. That's what makes America great. We can disagree. We can have informed debate, discussion, and dialogue, but we can't make up the facts. We can't lie. That's where the problem is. And the U.S. government lied to the American people about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction programs, making a case for war on things they knew no longer existed because I got rid of them. Other people got rid of them. I'll give you one example, then we can move on. In 1993, I did a briefing for James Woolsey and his senior staff. He was the director of the CIA at the time. And I was briefing him on the work that I and other inspectors had done to account for Iraq's ballistic missile program. These are the missiles that they fired against Israel, against Saudi Arabia during the war, and they were responsible for getting rid of them. They had held on to 100 missiles, and about a half a dozen launchers tried to hide them from us. We found them. They had to get rid of them. We accounted for them. It was complicated. They had blown a lot of these things up in secret and buried them in the desert and pretend they never existed. But we found that we had to do forensic digging them up, going through the pieces, putting them together, and proving that every missile was accounted for. We did that. I went and briefed them and said, it's done. We can close the books. We're finished with this one. Well, the U.S. government wouldn't allow us to make that decision. What the CIA director said and what his subordinate said afterwards is, interesting briefing, Ritter, but we don't accept your numbers. The number we accept is 12 to 20 missiles and 6 launchers, and that number will never change no matter what you do. That tells you that they just made stuff up. And that's when I realized that the U.S. government is not about, of the people, by the people, for the people. The U.S. government's for itself. It's a power-hungry institution that is willing to lie to the American people. We, the people of the United States of America, who own this government, by the way, we own this country. They work for us. And our employees have decided that they can lie to us. They can deceive us. They can punish us. They can imprison us. They can destroy us if we disagree with them. It's an American right. It's a duty. It's an obligation to disagree with the government. I hope people understand that the most patriotic thing you can do is stand up and tell the government, hell no. No. The yes people are the people that degrade democracy, because democracy is we, the people of the United States of America, holding our government accountable for what they do in our name. And if all we become is a bunch of yes people, this system's broke. Sabrina, the system's broke.
That's right. You're right 100%. You mentioned Saddam Hussein, and one of the things that I've often argued, and I want to get your opinion about this, I really do believe that the U.S. government going in and removing Saddam Hussein, I believe that actually paved the way for groups like ISIS to rise to power. Because as much, I have a lot of criticism for Saddam Hussein, obviously I'm not pro Saddam, but I felt like when Saddam Hussein was in power, he was able to keep those types of groups in check. But once the U.S. government went in and they removed Saddam Hussein, that just opened the door for ISIS to kind of just take way.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. Look, I will say this. As the years go by, I'm more and more sympathetic to Saddam Hussein. I mean, as you study the history of Iraq, you realize, A, it's an artificial country. It's made up by a bunch of white people in Europe smoking cigars and drawing lines on a map, putting people together that never should have been together. And then they say this is a nation, but to govern it, they popped a Saudi Arabian guy, a Hashemite that they promised in World War I that you'd give us some power. And they said, hey, you're the king of Iraq. Well, the Iraqis hung him by the neck until he was dead. They took over, but took over what? The ruling tribes were Sunni tribes that had been the sort of the dominant power since Ottoman times. You have a majority Shia population. Then you have the Kurds up north. None of them get along. So it's a dysfunctional nation. And Saddam Hussein comes in and says, if Iraq is supposed to govern, we have to get everybody to work together. And so we have to quash any notion of separate. He wanted to make a singular entity. He did it violently. He did it cruelly. But what else is he supposed to do when you have a dysfunctional nation? Look at Iraq today, 100% dysfunctional nation, because all the things that Saddam was trying to fix broke apart, and America went in and shattered it even more. They can't glue Humpty Dumpty back together again. Iraq is a fundamentally broken country because of this. And Saddam Hussein was the anti-ISIS. He was the anti-Al-Qaeda. He was a secular leader who would never tolerate this kind of religious fanaticism taking place inside Iraq. You're 100% correct. Getting rid of Saddam Hussein paved the way, not just for ISIS and Al-Qaeda to take root in that region, but it also began the process of taking down established, and again, some probably deserve to be taken down, but the Arab Spring destabilized an entire region, and it came about because of the instability that was engendered in the region because of our decision to remove Saddam Hussein and not have a clue what was going to happen afterwards. At the end of the Gulf War, the war that I fought in, there was a plan we had at the end of the war to shoot up and take Baghdad. We're like, might as well finish this thing. And you know who said no? Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney was the Secretary of Defense at the time. And Dick Cheney said, what do we do the day after? Okay, you're telling me you can go up and you can take Baghdad. There's no doubt in my mind you can. It's the U.S. military. We can do it. But then what? The next day when we're patrolling the streets and the people start to look to us and say, why are you here? How are you going to govern? We don't have a plan. They hold us account and they start killing kids, killing American kids. What do we do? He said, if we can't answer that question, we don't do it. And so we made the decision that keeping Saddam in power was the right move because it was stable until we could find someone to replace him, until we could identify that person, answer that question. Well, in 2003, Dick Cheney's greenlighting, running up to Baghdad, getting rid of Saddam, and he hadn't a clue who was going to take over, how it was going to be governed. We're going to be greeted with flowers and song and embrace. No, we weren't. We were greeted by people who, the same thing he predicted back in 1991 would happen, happened. People said, okay, you broke it, you own it. The Pottery Barn rule that Colin Powell was so fond of. We broke it, we own it. We didn't have a solution. And 20 years later, we have Americans still dying in Iraq. It's stupid, stupid and criminal. And I'll also say this. I've traveled around the world quite a bit. I've met a lot of people from around there, and I have to yet meet people that aren't cool, aren't great, aren't wonderful. The Iraqis are wonderful people, wonderful people. The Arab hospitality is genuine. It's real. It's not fake. When they invite you into their country or invite you into their home, it's as sincere as the day is long. These are people that deserve all the peace and harmony that everybody deserves. And what we've done to their country is criminal. We have caused entire generations of Iraqi youth to grow up knowing nothing but violence, instability. Americans should get sick every morning when they wake up and look in the mirror and say, what have we done? Because guess what, America? We're responsible. We, the people, are responsible. We put these people in power, and then we do nothing about it because we wrap ourselves in a little cocoon of comfort. We, sit there and play video games and watch TV and go to the mall and do all this kind of stuff. And we forget there's a whole world out there that is paying the price for our collective sins. And Iraq is a collective American sin. Do you remember Madeleine Albright? 500,000 children have died, Madeleine. What do you think about that? That's a price we're willing to pay. We're willing to pay, Madeleine. I'm not willing to pay that price. No, don't put that on me. But it was on me, and it's on every American. The blood of those 500,000 children and more now is on all of our hands because we're Americans. We are responsible for what happens here if we're going to call ourselves a democracy.
Well said. I want to pivot a little bit to Ukraine, because I did notice that mainstream media, at least Morning Joe, is now acknowledging that Ukraine is not winning this battle against Russia, which I think a lot of us in left independent media predicted that this was going to happen anyway. We knew that Ukraine was not going to be able to beat Russia, even with the billions of dollars of aid that came from the U.S. government in reference to weapons, et cetera. We knew how powerful Russia's military is. Also, Russia has a neighbor next door to them called China, that if they need to knock on their door and say, come help us out, then we're looking at potential, World War III. But mainstream media is now admitting that Ukraine is not going to be able to win this. So the question that I have is, number one, why do you think they are now finally acknowledging that this isn't going to happen? And two, what do you think this means in reference to the possibility of a World War III? Where do you think the U.S. government will act next?
Well, with the Ukraine, what I'll say is this. Generally speaking, the American people are the most ignorant people in the world about the world they live in. We don't know anything about the world that's outside our borders. Well, we don't even know anything about our own borders. I mean, there are people who live in Albany all their lives. Their big adventure is going to New York City or going to Disneyland. That's it. They don't know anything about Mississippi. They don't know anything about Alabama, California. Ignorant about their country, and God forbid now we talk about the complexities of Canada or what's going on in Mexico. And then you move down to Latin America, South America, they're confused. They can't even point Ukraine on the map. And so these ignorant people, including, by the way, all the talking heads on TV, I've met them all. There was a time when I was actually invited to be on all those shows. Back when Bill Clinton was getting beat up and the Republicans thought that my message was cool, so I could be on Good Morning America. Me and Katie Couric were cutting the rug and all this kind of stuff. Dan Rather and I were having beer afterwards, and Tom Brokaw invited me to his Christmas parties. I mean, I was in, and but then suddenly I became inconvenient because the truth became inconvenient because suddenly a different president came in and different messaging, and boom, done. But I met them all. They're dumber than dirt. Truly are dumber than dirt. These are people that read what is put on the teleprompter in front of them, and they don't have any depth, none. Their producers own their brains. And I'm dead serious. And any of you big name people out there, all you talking heads, if you disagree with me, I challenge you right now to a debate, anytime, anywhere, drop of the hat. Let's do it. Let's hook and jab on stage in front of an audience and find out who is shallow and who's deep. They are dumber than dirt, just like the audience they talk to. And when it comes to an issue like Russia, we're gripped here in the United States with Russophobia. It's a fear of Russia, an unnatural fear of Russia. Ask people about Russia. They don't know anything about Russia, Sabrina. Nothing. They know nothing about Russia. And so suddenly they're told Vladimir Putin's this evil dude. And they go, yeah, he's evil. Why? Well, Tom Brokaw told me so. Or, so somebody told me he was evil, but they don't know who he is. They don't know where he came from. He was KGB. Really? Wow. That's a lot of knowledge there, guy. He's also a taxi driver in St. Petersburg. When he got out of the KGB in the decade of the 1990s, was one of the worst decades in Russian history, that millions of Russians lost their lives because of the policies that we imposed on those people. We empowered oligarchs who stole money from the pensioners, leaving them homeless in apartments that suddenly became valuable only after the pensioners were removed. So mafia gangs went around and murdered millions of pensioners to steal their apartments and sell them to make money for the oligarchs who then fed that money back to us. I bet most Americans don't know that. That's what created Vladimir Putin. He's a guy who came into power in 1999, New Year's Day, by New Year's Eve, and took a broken country. And since then, he's been trying to rebuild it and lead it out. And we resent this because we thought we had beaten the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War. We thought we could keep Russia down. We had a compliant tool in there named Boris Yeltsin, who's willing to do anything we asked him to do, sell his country down the road. And suddenly a guy comes in named Vladimir Putin and says, I'm not playing that game anymore. I'm a Russian. I'm going to do what's good for Russia. Doesn't mean I'm anti-you, but I'm pro-me. And he started to do this, and we resented him. And this resentment led to us not trying to understand Russia. John F. Kennedy gave a speech at the American University in June of 1963. It's considered one of the best speeches he ever gave. But one of the things he talks about there is the need to not necessarily agree with Russia or the Soviet Union at that time on everything, but to understand their point of view, their perspective, that before we make a final decision, we have to put ourselves in their shoes and see the problem from their perspective. And once we do that, we might understand why they're doing what they're doing, and maybe we won't fear it as much. Maybe we can work together with them. I can guarantee you right now that if every American took the time to put themselves in the shoes of the Russians, go back to the 1990s and see what it's like to live there. Have your relatives commit suicide by alcoholism, just jump off a building, die of sclerosis, you name it, it happened. It was bad. Or if they were a pensioner. And when I say a pensioner in the 1990s, I'm talking about the people who saved the world in World War II. The Soviet Union lost 27 million people. They were the number one killer of Nazis out there. And that generation are the pensioners that we're talking about. The people that saved the world, stood up to Nazi Germany, saved the world, are being murdered by gangs for their apartments. You got to put yourself in their shoes and understand the miracle that's taken place in Russia. I was just there last May. I have to tell you, clean, well organized, the economy's working, and great people. Just like the Iraqis, the Russians are great people. They are welcoming, they're friendly, they're educated, they're cultured, they're everything that we claim they're not. But this Russophobia has allowed the media and the government to shape the minds of the Americans so that we accept anything at face value. We don't know why Russia went in. We're just told that Russia brutally invaded Ukraine. Nobody's told about the Maidan in 2014, the coup that was orchestrated by the CIA, the European Union, the United States, Victoria Nuland's role in that, Miss neocon, handing out cookies to people as if she was just there to hand out cookies, not to promote the elevation of neo-Nazi parties. Remember, we talked about World War II, defeating the Nazis. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Google Stepan Bandera, why don't you? He is the national hero of Ukraine. They worship this dude. They name streets after him. They have statues of him. That guy slaughtered 30 to 40,000 Jews. He killed over 110,000 Poles, and he killed over 200,000 Russians because he is a white racist. It's not me saying that. It's the CIA saying that, MI6 saying that. The U.S. Congress acknowledges that the supporters of Bandera are white supremacists, neo-Nazi supporters, but they're the ones we put in power. And then we turned around, we expanded NATO after we said we weren't going to expand NATO. Remember the deal that was cut with Gorbachev in 1989, 1990, when Germany was to unify. Not 1 inch eastward, we promised, not 1 inch. And then we expanded. We lie through our teeth. Every time our lips move, it's a lie. And the Russians are looking at this going, what are you doing? You're expanding to our borders, and now you empower Stepan Bandera ideology in Ukraine. We can't accept this. We won't allow it to happen. There was a conflict because these Banderas declared ethnic war on the ethnic Russians, and they tried to commit genocide against them. Study what happened in Mariupol. Study what happened in Odessa, a city on the Black Sea, when the Banderas went down there in May, burning to death 48 Russians hundreds were jammed into a building. They set it on fire. And then as the people tried to come out, they shot them. They compelled the others to run back in the building and die of smoke inhalation and flames. And then the bodies were on the street. And these wonderful people whom we fund today go around and kick the bodies, spit on them to make sure they're dead. Good people, good democratic people. We empowered them. And the Russians said, hell no. And so the ethnic Russian people rose up and fought against them. It became a conflict from 2014 to, until 2015. Interestingly, in 2015, when the Russians intervened, they surrounded the Ukrainian army, and they had 25,000 of them surrounded. They were going to kill them all. Now, I know we're not supposed to enjoy death and destruction, but the Russians had them good. And suddenly France and Germany step in and say, don't kill those Ukrainians, please, Vladimir Putin, don't kill them. We can make peace. And he said, how? These guys are all about ethnic genocide against the Russian people. We can't allow this to happen. No, let them go. And we will have a peace accord called the Minsk Accords. And we guarantee we're going to make it work. And Putin said, okay, I believe in peace. And he let 25,000 Ukrainian soldiers go. And then from 2015 to 2022, NATO started training the Ukrainian army. NATO put out a slide that said, we train a battalion of Ukrainian troops to NATO standard every 55 days here in Western Ukraine. Then they drew an arrow to the east so they can kill Russians here. NATO's bragging about that. That's the mission. The whole mission was to buy time. It wasn't about peace. It was to buy time for the Ukrainians to build an army capable of defeating the Russians. And here's where you can criticize Putin. He actually believed the West when they said they wanted peace. And he kept pushing for peace, pushing for peace, pushing for peace until he's finally betrayed. And then what he said is, okay, I don't believe in Minsk. So what we need instead of Minsk is a new European security framework. He put forward 2 draft treaties in December of 2021, one to the US, one to NATO, and said, if you don't want a war in Ukraine, all we have to do is sit down and talk about this. Just talk about it. Take it seriously. We ignored it, pushed it off. And then we got surprised when he invaded. And when he invaded, people like me thought he's going to roll to Kiev and take it over because the Russian army, of course, was unstoppable. But that wasn't their purpose. Russia was never trying to take over Ukraine. The purpose of the initial military operation was to get the Ukrainians to the negotiating table to bring a rapid end to this war. And it almost worked. 3 sessions in Gomel, Belarus, 2 sessions in Turkey. The last session, the Ukrainians signed an agreement. You know what the agreement would have given them? All the territory that Russia occupied would be returned, except Crimea. Russia said, you ain't never getting that back because that's Russian. The Donbass, independent with a referendum. But everything else that Russia occupied would get. And what the Russians did as a proof of good faith is they voluntarily withdrew from Kiev and from northern Ukraine and said, there it is, confidence building measure. We withdrew. We promised to withdraw from every place. All you have to do is sign here and say, we won't join NATO. That's it. We won't join NATO. War's over. Boris Johnson flies in with the support of the CIA, the United States, and says, don't accept that deal. We can beat the Russians. We're going to give you all the money and equipment in the world. And the stupid Ukrainians went, we'll take that deal. Today, if they had taken that deal, 400,000 Ukrainian soldiers would be alive today. 10 to 20 million Ukrainians would have their homes. Millions of children would have a stable life, be going to school, getting the education that they need to be good citizens. Instead, an entire nation has been destroyed. Ukraine's lost 20% of its territory because Russia afterwards said, we can never allow you to govern territory where there's an ethnic majority population. And so Russia took Zaporizhia, took Kherson, took Donetsk, took Lugansk, had referendums and brought them in. They said, you're never getting that back. But Ukraine could have had all that territory had they just accepted peace. Russia is the only nation out there that's been trying to have a peaceful outcome to this war. But now Russia's at a point where they say, we can't negotiate with Zelensky. We can't trust him or the West anymore. We don't trust them. We're going to win on our terms. And they're winning. And they're winning decisively. And what's happened is all the lies that people were telling about Russia were being accepted at face value by a population who knows nothing about Russia. You can't lie anymore because it's so obvious what's happening right now. You can't spin it away. And so Ukraine has lost. All that money we poured in is gone. All those tanks we sent them, they're gone. All those men we trained, they're dead. And Ukraine has nothing left to replace them. So now you ask the question about World War III. Here's the thing. The United States said early on in this conflict that, and again, if you're a Ukrainian, guys, please go back to the co-check room and get your IQ because you checked it at the door when you came into this thing called the American-sponsored war. America doesn't care about Ukraine. Let's just be straight up about that. We don't. We never have. America has allowed you to sacrifice 400,000 of your men for nothing. We will never, ever, ever allow you to join NATO. You will never be a member of NATO. You won't be a member of the European Union. We don't like you. We're just using you. That's it. We thought that we could use you to create a war that generates instability in Russia to bring them down. The strategic defeat of Russia was our objective from day one. We wanted to replicate that Maidan revolution that took place in Kiev in 2014 in Moscow. We even call it the Moscow Maidan. We thought we could sanction Russia, collapse their economy, create military difficulties so that the Russian population rose up and removed Vladimir Putin from power. But even the Washington Post, even the Wall Street Journal today say that was fantasy. It was apparently never going to happen because Putin is stronger today than he has ever been. But the key thing is Russia said, because what's World War III? We're really talking nuclear war. It means the end of the world. It means that we start firing nukes against each other. We used to do arms control. That was my thing. I was a weapons inspector in the Soviet Union. I implemented the first nuclear disarmament treaty. I believe in disarmament. I believe that what we tried to build in the Cold War could have relevance to this day. But in order to do that, these are bilateral relations that have mutual reciprocity, which means that we have to trust one another. We have to trust one another. I mean, Ronald Reagan said trust but verify. I was the verification guy. But still, there has to be a modicum of trust. The Russians don't trust us. We've lied to them across the board. So what the Russians have said is, we're done with arms control the way it's done. We don't want any treaties with you at all. None. Zero. We don't trust you. In order to have a treaty relationship, we have to trust you, and we can't trust you. You've lied to us from day one. And then what Russia did before they did, they told us, stop withdrawing from treaties. We withdrew, for instance, from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. That was a treaty signed in 1972 that was supposed to create a balance of power between Russia and the United States that was premised on the notion of mutually assured destruction, meaning that we're not going to build missile defenses because we accept the fact that if there's a war, if there's missile defense, people might be likely to fire nuclear weapons. We want both sides to be scared to death of firing nuclear weapons. So no missile defenses. It's called mutually assured destruction. I launch against you, you launch against me, we both die. So why don't we not launch? So we did that. The ABM Treaty was a cornerstone of this. The Bush administration in 2002 withdrew from it because we thought Russia was weak. Remember, we had the decade of the 90s, keeping Yeltsin down. They were weak. We don't have to care about the Russians anymore. We're America. We can do anything we want. And we want to build missile defense because why not? And so we quit the treaty in Russia. And Putin said, don't do that. Don't do that. That's destabilizing. You're threatening us now because now you're going to build missile defenses and you're going to be in a situation that you're going to ask us to continue to reduce our nuclear arsenals to the point where if there is an exchange, you could hit us first, kill half our missiles, and whatever we have left fires, and you shoot them down, and we got nothing. Nothing. This is destabilizing. Please don't do it. Then in 2018, Putin gave up and gave a speech, and he said, I asked you not to do it. So what we've done now is we built missiles that you can't shoot down. These are the most powerful missiles in the world. There's nothing you can do to defend yourself. Are you listening now? He actually said that. Are you listening now? And we're not. We continue to lie. I meet often with Anatoly Antonov. He's the Russian ambassador to the United States. The irony is, me as a private citizen, just having talks about disarmament, I've met more with the Russian ambassador in the last year than the State Department has. Tells you how bad things are. I've met more with the Russian defense attaché than the Pentagon has. The defense attaché is a former ballistic missile guy, meaning that if you want to talk about disarmament treaties and nuclear disarmament, he's the guy to talk to. Nobody's talking to him. Antonov negotiated the last remaining treaty, the New START treaty. He negotiated. He's the guy we should be talking to. Everybody's ignoring him. So finally, the Russians went, we don't want to have a relationship with you. And now here's the problem. They have all these new weapons, and they're really, really good. There's nothing we can do to defend against them. So what we're going to do is build our new weapons. But now there won't be a treaty in place to control this. And we're in danger of having this nuclear arms race break out. And once that happens, one mistake, one glitch in the system, one misidentification of radar, and it's over. Sabrina, it's over. It's over that quick. You won't even know it. You'll be sitting there, there'll be a flash, and you'll be dead. And that's what you need to hope for. You need to hope that you're in a place that's going to get hit with a thermonuclear warhead early on, because you want to die instantly. What you don't want to be is the person outside the immediate lethal range and die of a slow death of radiation poisoning or starvation or disease and have this long lingering death. But the bottom line is we're all going to die. No one will survive a thermonuclear exchange between the United States and Russia. And that's the direction we're heading right now. Now, neither side claims to want this. But, the United States, we're so accustomed to being the world's sole remaining superpower after the collapse of the Soviet Union. We are so arrogant. We are so full of ourselves that we can't, for a moment, do what John F. Kennedy asked us to do, put ourselves in the Russian shoes, to see the problem from the Russian perspective. I've done that. And I have to tell you, once you do that, excuse my language, but you realize how much America sucks as a nation. I mean, and we really do suck because we lie, and we don't care about living in harmony with anybody. It's only about us. We are the most selfish nation on the planet. And it disgusts me. It disgusts me. And I'm a proud American. Don't get me wrong. You come after my country, I'll be on the front line ready. I'm getting a little old, so I'll be hobbling on the front line, but I'll still be there. I'm not going to let anybody run roughshod over America, but I'll be damned if I'm going to support us running roughshod over other people. That's not what this is about. We're supposed to be the good nation. We're supposed to be the people that believe in human rights and individual liberties and freedoms. Our Constitution is supposed to have meaning. It stands for nothing. not only do we violate the rights of American citizens on a daily basis, when I say we, the government we put in power, but we take these same standards. All men are created equal. And we know that means all humans are created equal, all men and women. That's our Constitution. All men are created equal. We're all equal, but we're not. What does the American president say when he signs off? God bless America. What does that mean? I mean, I'm not overly religious, but I would imagine it means that the creator, the man who created the heavens and the earth, 6 days, seventh day he rested, that God, the big man, created the earth. And he only blesses Americans? I mean, God bless America. So God only comes down and touches America. The rest of the world, no, God damns them. You're all damned. It's criminal to think that way. But that's how we view it. American exceptionalism. Joe Biden just wrote a stupid op-ed in the Washington Post where he talks about America being the exceptional nation. We're not exceptional. The only thing we're exceptional about is being liars. We're exceptional liars. We're exceptional thieves. We steal everything from the world. We don't do anything honestly. The rules-based international order that we're seeking to impose is not about the rule of law. It's about the rule of might makes right. That America dictates outcome. That's it. That's wrong, ladies and gentlemen. That's wrong. And anyways, you're getting me a little, not you getting me, a little tired.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've been fortunate enough where I've had a lot of international students, and I've had some students from Russia and Ukraine, and they've echoed some of the same sentiments that you've added. Actually, I had one Ukrainian student that told me that they actually had never met an African-American person until they came to the U.S. And then when we go into the Ukraine war and I learned about the Nazification in Ukraine, I learned about the letter that was signed by people like Rokana, where they said in 2018 that they were deeply concerned about the Nazification, not just in Ukraine, but also in Poland, which all of a sudden they seem to forget about that letter now. Yeah. It all started to make more sense. But one of the things that I've wondered, I noticed something that I didn't notice before. Ukraine is right next to Moldova. So then I started to think about something else when I hear people talking about Ukraine corruption, particularly Zelensky as well, using US aid, using some of these dollars for things that are not a part of this conflict. And I honestly have to ask, I know that Moldova also has an issue with corruption. And funnily enough, I learned about that from 90 Day Fiancé, where there was a cast member who was from Moldova, and he was telling his fiancé that when you come to my country, you have to understand there's a lot of corruption that happens in Moldova. And I was once a part of that at some point in time. So there may be things that you hear, et cetera. I wonder if some of the corruption from Moldova in some way made its way to Ukraine. Do you know anything about that, or about the corruption that has been claimed about Zelensky, for example, about him using dollars for other purposes instead of the war?
Yeah, I mean, look, Moldova is a corrupt nation. Romania is a corrupt nation. That region had a lot of corruption, but Ukraine is corrupt on its own right. It's not as though Moldova was a diseased entity that infected Ukraine. It might be the other way around. Moldova might have had a chance, except it was living next door to Ukraine, which from its very inception has been the most corrupt place in the world from the very beginning. A lot of people talk about, there was an agreement. I think it was, it's either the Budapest or the Bucharest agreement. It might be Budapest agreement, but in 1994, where Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear arms. This is the legend. They gave up their nuclear arms with the guarantee of security. And everybody's like, so Russia now has violated that, and Ukraine would have been better off having nuclear weapons because the West has abandoned it. And I always point out to people that Ukraine never had nuclear weapons. Never. There were Soviet weapons. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russian Federation said, there are weapons, nuclear weapons. And Ukraine never had the ability to fire them. All the codes, the launch codes, the locking mechanisms were all controlled by the Russians. And the Russians made it clear to the Ukrainians, you make a move on the nukes, we kill you all. It isn't going to happen. So the Ukrainians never owned them. What they agreed to is that they would dispose of them, either return them to Russia or have international inspectors come in and remove them. And this was part of Ukraine's acknowledgement that in order to be part of the international community, they had to agree to join the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which means they forswore being a nuclear power. They agreed to this all up front. But then the Ukrainian governments ran around, they go, How can we get more money? This is the honest to God's truth, Sabrina. How can we get more money? We're going to blackmail the world. We're going to say we ain't giving up these nukes until you pay us money. And so they sat there and it became a giant grift. And they sat there and took more money from the West, more money from the West, more. And finally, Russia came in and said, we're tired of this game. Here's all the money you asked for. Let's get rid of the nukes. We're done. But it was a grift. Ukraine is a giant grift. There's not been an honest day of governance in Ukraine. The oligarchs in Ukraine are some of the most corrupt and some of the most violent. When I was a UN weapons inspector, I went to Kiev in 1997. We were going there to try and talk the Ukrainian government to stopping the work of this Ukrainian arms dealer who was basically taking apart the weapons factories that Ukraine had and selling the production equipment to Iraq, to Libya, to other nations. And we wanted to get them to intervene to stop. Oh man, just it's not government like you think it is. It's government of what can you do for me? And I was an American, but I was a UN employee the whole time I was there. Whether it's from Kuchma, the president, on down to the intelligence service, every meeting was, hey, now we'll do this, but can you put in a good word for us to join NATO? Can you help us get into NATO? And I'm like, I'm a UN official. I can't help you get into NATO. I don't represent the United States of America. Yeah, but you're an American, right? You can do this, right? And I'm like, no, I really can't. But you're saying yes, right? No, I'm really saying no, I can't. I had to get out of there. I had to get out of there because it was so corrupt. I was told by someone that I'm really angering people because I'm not playing the game and that my life could be at risk. That's how corrupt this place is. It's a disgusting cesspool of corruption and criminality that occupies the highest levels of government and has occupied from day one. The oligarchs run the country. You know, Zelensky was an actor. He was in this show called Servant of the People. And it's a fascinating show because he played a common man who became president. He was a teacher and he became president. And then because of this show, the Ukrainian people thought he could be president because he played one on TV. So they elected him to be president. But when Servant of the People starts, it's basically showing this room with, I think, 4 or 5, faceless men who are running the country. And they're talking about the deals they're cutting, what they're going to do. That's how Ukraine's run. If you think it's about the parliament, the will of the people, nope, it's about the oligarchs getting together and divvying up power. And it's always been that way. Zelensky was brought in by an oligarch to do exactly what he's doing right now. He is not the representative of the people. He's not a servant of the people. He is the servant of the oligarchs, which means he's a servant of the powers that are using the oligarchs to pursue policies inside Ukraine. It's always been corrupt. It will never be a democracy as long as this system exists. The one good thing about this war is it will probably break that system. A Russian victory will probably result in the defeat of this corrupt entity that's known as Ukraine, and whatever emerges after that might have a chance of normalcy.
All right, Scott, one more question for you, because I know you have another one at 3 p.m. One more question for you, and this is in reference to Israel and Gaza. Number one, are you surprised that some of the advocates that were against this war in Ukraine and against the U.S. government sending billions of dollars to Ukraine, like RFK Jr., for example, are you surprised that some of these people seem to have the opposite position when it comes to Israel and Gaza, where they are for the war? They're for Israel continuing to bomb Gaza. And then 2, what do you think is the future of Israel after this is all over with? Because that's the question I think a lot of people are asking. Okay, there's a temporary ceasefire, but if it gets to the point where there's a permanent ceasefire, then what happens? What happens to the Palestinian people? Are they allowed to come back to the northern part of Gaza? Are they displaced somewhere else? What about the occupations that are happening in the West Bank? Is that going to continue? What do you think is going to happen to someone like Benjamin Netanyahu after all this is over? Because I'm noticing that his favorability rating is starting to decrease as well.
Starting to decrease. Very unpopular man right now. Look, I'll be honest. I traveled to Israel extensively from 1994 to 1998 as a weapons inspector, and I worked very closely with the Israeli intelligence at the highest levels. And we were, why? Well, Israel was hit by Iraqi Scud missiles during the war, and Israel had a vested interest in making sure that Iraq never again fired these missiles against them. My job was to get rid of these missiles and other weapons of mass destruction. And I wanted to make sure that when I went to the Security Council, or my boss went to the Security Council and said, we've given Iraq a clean bill of health, that the Israeli intelligence didn't slide one of those envelopes under the door with the photographs that says, nah, guess again, we have this information. I wanted to know what Israel knew. And I felt that Israel had a vested interest of letting me know that, because they wanted to stop these missiles. And I was right. For 4 years, we had a very good working relationship, and it helped progress the issue of disarmament forward. When I went there, the prime minister was Yitzhak Rabin. And I fell in love with the guy. I can't claim to be an expert on Israel-Palestinian relations. I'm not. I'm a weapons guy. I'm a Russia guy. I'm a war guy. I'm not a Middle East complexity guy. But, I was there when Hamas was blowing things up. They blew up a restaurant 100 meters from my hotel where I had eaten the day before. They blew up a shopping center where 2 days prior I had bought a gift for my wife. They blew up a discotheque underneath my restaurant. Every time I went there, Hamas was blowing things up. So I'm like, I see what Hamas is doing, and I see what the Israeli people that they're suffering. But what I noticed is that under Yitzhak Rabin, the people picked themselves up, dusted themselves off, and said, this is why we must have peace. This is why we must pursue peace. And Yitzhak Rabin believed in this. I was there the day he was assassinated. I saw what his death did, and I know who to blame. Benjamin Netanyahu was the opposition leader, and he's the guy that held hate rallies where they likened Yitzhak Rabin to a Nazi, where these Talmudic rabbis cited ancient, interpretations of the Torah that have nothing to do with the word of God, but everything to do with the evil, corrupt nature of man, and said that he has betrayed the Jews, therefore he could be killed. And a Jewish right-wing fanatic said, I heard the rabbi and I had to act, and he shot Yitzhak Rabin and killed him. And when he killed him, he killed peace. He killed the chance of peace. And I've watched Israel erode since that time. When I took my wife there in 1995, because I used to travel there a lot. So I said, hey, why don't you come there for a long weekend? Let me show you Israel. She fell in love with me. The Israeli people are wonderful people. Wonderful people. Everybody's wonderful. God, I haven't met bad people yet. I mean, I have met bad people, but I can't paint certain people. Young, vibrant, full of life, energetic, beautiful, friendly. Man, Israel was great. And my wife's religious. Like I said, I'm not too religious, but to walk in the land of Jesus, to walk in the land of Moses, to go to the River Jordan, to see where Jesus was baptized, to do the Via Dolorosa, where Jesus walked with the cross, to see all these things. For her, it was deeply moving, deeply moving. For me, I'm a historian, and to see the places of the Bible, because I view the Bible as, as history. So I'm looking at it all. Deeply moving to see the Al-Aqsa Mosque and realize it's the third holiest shrine for the Islamic religion, to see the Wailing Wall, to realize it's the remnant of the Jewish temple. All this stuff just resonates, and you just sit there and go, my God, what a wonderful place. My Israeli host said, kick a rock and you uncover centuries of history. And it's just, whoa, man. We went back in 2009, totally different country. They have a wall. When they talk about apartheid Israel, it's apartheid Israel. They built a wall to separate them from the Palestinians. They treat the Palestinians as second-class citizens. The fear that existed in Israel, totally different country. These people weren't attractive to me anymore because they were hate-filled. They were feared. That was Benjamin Netanyahu. He did that to Israel. He ruined Israel. He destroyed Israel. And so now I take a look at what's happening here. And again, I'm not somebody who was a Palestinian activist. I'm just being honest with you. I'm not somebody who got on the boat to go to Gaza and all that stuff. I was doing other stuff. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying it wasn't on my radar. But then when this conflict happens, it's sort of a wake-up call. And you're going, whoa, how did this happen? Why did this happen? And once you start asking that question, you realize that it was inevitable it was going to happen, because you can't treat a people the way the Palestinian people have been treated by Israel. This isn't the Israel of Yitzhak Rabin. This isn't an Israel that's looking for a Palestinian state or a Palestinian solution. This is an Israel governed by a Likud party whose basic tenet, you know how they criticize AOC and Tlaib, the representative from Michigan, from the river to the sea. Well, Hamas came into being in the 1990s, maybe the late 1980s. The Likud party came into being in the 1950s. Their original mantra, their charter is from the river to the sea. It meaning there will be no Arabs. They invented it. They invented it. And they're in power right now in Israel. And these are horrible people. They don't believe in Israel as defined by international law of the United Nations. They believe in Eretz Israel, the biblical Eretz Israel, and they want to take it all over. That means Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. That's what they want. That's their vision. If the Bible says Moses walked on it, they own it. And they're occupying land that was stolen from Palestinian people. And then they take the survivors of the crimes, the murders that took place, the ethnic cleansing and genocide, and stuff them into open air concentration camps like Gaza. And then you wonder why the Palestinians rise up and revolt. I mean, I'll probably get in a lot of trouble for saying this right now, but my sympathies are with Hamas, not with Israel. I used to be Team Israel. I was on Team Israel. I was there. I helped stop missiles fall against Israel. I worked with Israel for 4 years to create the opportunity for peace. And I believed in Israel's right to exist. And I still believe in Israel's right to exist, but not the way they define it now. There must be a Palestinian state. The Palestinian people have every bit the same right to live the way the Israelis live, on land that belongs to them with no Israeli control. But you can't have that if you have an Israeli government that says the Palestinians shouldn't exist at all. And here's the most important part: have a Palestinian Authority. Mahmoud Abbas is the president from the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and his military wing, Fatah, who have surrendered to the Israelis. These are people who've taken billions of dollars of aid, and they've built giant villas for themselves, and they travel first class around the world, and they live the high life, and their sole job is to prevent security problems for Israel. Now, you're a Palestinian, and you sit there and you say, who's doing anything to help me get my homeland? You realize that the president of Palestine isn't. He's doing the exact opposite. He's working with the Israelis to guarantee there will never be a Palestinian homeland, which for him is okay because he needs that uncertainty to generate more money to enrich himself, stealing from the Palestinians, from the refugees who are still in their refugee camps. Only one governing body, one governing party has stood up for the Palestinian people, and that's Hamas. The Palestinian people need a champion. And that's the only person that's the only entity that stood up so far to champion them. I don't condone terrorism. I don't condone the slaughter of civilians. But, you know, when you're an occupied people and you've been subjected to the brutality of the Israeli occupation, and ladies and gentlemen, it's brutal. It's brutal. And it has been for some time now. You have a right to rise up. You have a right to assert your God-given right to be a human being on a land that belongs to you and belongs to your people. So you reap what you sow. Israel has sown the whirlwind, or sown the wind. They're going to reap the whirlwind. I'm quoting the Bible because the Israelis believe. Now we get to RFK Jr. You know, I have to say that I was a big fan of RFK Jr. I bought into it. I drank that Kool-Aid as quick as I could because that guy was saying the right things about Russia and Ukraine. And to me, it was a breath of fresh air because I was talking till I was blue in the face about the reality of Russia, and just nobody gets it. Just, here will speak. And he was sitting there, and he said, "I get it." I mean, we talked a lot. I'm not going to give away too much, but he would call me frequently, and we would talk about Russia. And I found that a lot of things that I was telling him would find its way into his what he was saying. I went, "Okay, I'm Team Bobby. I'm there." And then Israel. I'm like, what the hell happened here? And it doesn't make any sense because Bobby's a thinking man. I mean, I watched his brain work as he worked through the Russia problem. I saw him ask the right questions and demand answers and challenge, preconceived notions. And I'm like, if he just took that approach to Israel, man, this would be so easy. But no, he is a blind supporter of Israel, which means he stands for nothing. Because now I have to ask myself, does he say what he says about Russia because he believes in it, or does he believe that it positions him for a political advantage, meaning that with both Republicans and Democrats having staked out an anti-Russian stance, if he's going to shoot that middle gap to try and become president, to take the disaffected people and be the candidate of peace, that this is the stance he took, not because he believes in it, but because he's using the American people to position himself to victory. And that's what I think is happening here, because then you listen to him. This is the peace guy. Listen to him, not just about Israel. Listen to him about China.
Yep.
Listen to him about Iran. This man doesn't believe in peace. This man is a dyed-in-the-wool American supremacist. That's it. And the Russia thing is a topic of convenience for him. He doesn't believe in anything he's saying, and he proves it every time he opens his mouth about Israel. This Bobby Kennedy has sold out, and I'm no longer on Team Bobby. I don't know whose team I'm on right now, because I'm thoroughly disgusted with American politics as it is. The Republicans, the Democrats, they got nobody right now. Independent. I mean, Dennis Kucinich, if you're listening, please step forward. A man of honor, a man who could be an independent, a man who, has values. But gosh, is America ready for a man like that? I don't know, because, we seem to be a nation that accepts this criminality. I mean, Bobby Kennedy Jr. is defending war criminals. Come on, yep. Bobby, get a lawyer and just talk about the law of war. Talk about collective punishment. Talk about the Dahiwa doctrine that Israel has enshrined as its official policy. Talk about the statements made by the Israeli government. All of this is cognizable under international law as a war crime. It's not even a debate, Bobby. There wouldn't be a trial. They would be found guilty just on on prima facie. And
that's right.
He used to say, I'm the peace candidate.
Or talk to Norm Finkelstein or Max Blumenthal.
Boom. Well, I mean, look, I've been following Norm Finkelstein for some time now, and I'm amazed by his courage and by his passion. I hope one day to be able to see him in person and experience the power of his. Max and I are friends, and Max just continues to impress me with the courage of his stance as well. Aaron Mate is another one who is on the right side of history. There's a lot of Chris Hedges. There's a lot of people out there who are on the right side of history. You're on the right side of history. But our problem is that we've been relegated to, alternative media. We're not alternative. We're Americans. There's nothing alternative about us. We're mainstream, actually. I bet you get more followers and more views on your podcast than CNN gets on its nightly news. So we have to start taking ownership of the fact that this new media out there, this internet-based media, is very influential. It reaches a lot of people, and we're no longer the outsiders. People like you, like Max Blumenthal, like Chris Hedges, like Aaron Mate, you guys are, you're the truth tellers. You're putting down a marker out there that, is not only accessible to the American people, but openly challenges the mainstream narrative. And the more the mainstream narrative collapses, like it is right now in Ukraine. I mean, here's the frustrating part. I was out there saying all the right things about Iraqi weapons of mass destruction back in 2002, 2003, because I knew it. I mean, I lived it. I was the guy. I did it all. So I didn't have to lie, cheat, or steal. I just told the truth. The American people weren't ready for the truth. And that's the problem. We have to find a way to condition the American people to be more challenging of the powers that be. And maybe that's going to happen. Maybe we're starting to see a crumbling of the edifice of the mainstream media, where people realize they've been lied to, because they have been lied to about Ukraine. And hundreds of billions of dollars, our taxpayer dollars, have been sent off to support this corrupt regime. And I don't want to get too social here, but right here in Albany, I got homeless people in America, homeless, and it's cold right now. And these are people that don't have a place to go to, and they got problems. They got drug addiction, they got alcoholism, they got mental health issues, and nobody's helping them. Nobody. We have forgotten about them. We have people suffering. We have people living paycheck to paycheck to pay. I mean, if they don't get a paycheck, if there's a hiccup in the economy, half my neighbors aren't going to be able to make their mortgage. We have big problems here in America. I take the Amtrak train from Albany to New York City, then down to Washington, D.C. I'm putting my life in my hands, especially when you get down by Philly, as the train starts to do this, because the tracks can't handle the train. Our infrastructure is crumbling. America, we are not the bright, shining city on the hill anymore. I don't know if we ever were, but we aspired to be at one time. We said, this is what we want to be, and that's okay. It's okay to want to be that. Everybody wants to live the good life, but you have to stop buying into the lies and recognize that when you step out your door in the morning, you ain't stepping out into rose gardens, you're stepping out into raw sewage. That raw sewage is the state of America today. We got problems. We have huge problems. Racism, I don't want to go down that path, but you know what I'm talking about. Racism is a huge problem in America. The ignorance of the American people is a problem. Education's a problem. Healthcare. I'm getting to the age, they just told me I'm pre-diabetic, so I got to watch my health and all that kind of stuff. But, as you get older, your health starts to deteriorate, and then you wonder, well, what's going to be? Can I afford it? Am I going to be able to afford healthcare down the road? These are scary things. We have an entire generation of elderly that, if we're not careful, we may be condemning them like the Russians ended up condemning their pensioners in the 1990s. Because when the system collapsed, ladies and gentlemen, what's going to be there to help these people? You, the American people, you great citizens who care so much about your country. Here's my final challenge to the American people. The Constitution. I know it's not a perfect document. Nothing is, but it does aspire to create a better union. And there's an amendment process so we can do things like the Bill of Rights, to fix it. Amendment, 14th Amendment, sort of fixed a big problem there in America. And so we can do things with the Constitution to make this country great. I took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I've studied the Constitution because if I'm going to die for a document, I sort of like to know what it's about. My wife is from the former Soviet Union. To become an American citizen, she had to take a test on the Constitution and pass. So here's my challenge to all those red-blooded Americans out there that wave the flag and proudly proclaim you're an American. Go online, take the citizenship test. Don't cheat. Don't Google. Just take it honestly. Because you're an American. You know the Constitution, right? You've studied it. It's your country. Take the test and then be honest about the results. And I will tell you right now that 95% of you will fail it. And if you don't know the Constitution, then what the hell, how can you call yourself an American? Because the Constitution defines us for better or for worse, for right or for wrong. The Constitution defines who we are, what we are as a people. And if you don't know the Constitution, then you don't know what we're doing here. And none of this will make any sense. You can't sit here and say, I believe in free speech unless you understand the First Amendment and how it's been, applied by the Supreme Court, study the Supreme Court cases, understand what's going on, understand why this whole internet thing has thrown a curveball into the issue of free speech, the controversies around Twitter. You need to this is the duty and responsibility of every American citizen. We have to be an informed citizenry. We have to be educated, informed, because we vote, and that vote has to count and stand for something. Otherwise, we just become a bunch of sheep that, they every 4 years they send some sheepdogs down, and Democratic sheep go this way, Republican sheep go this way, independents go to the slaughterhouse, and that's it. That's what happens every 4 years because we're too stupid to do anything otherwise. Empower yourself. Knowledge is power. Make yourselves stronger. Make yourselves a better American.